Yeah. All right. Okay, Keith, stop. How many times do you can't keep talking about how women owe you sex. How many times have I told you? Not when we're about to record the podcast. All right. Hey, you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and you're listening to the That Chapter. I feel like I started a podcast before I was ready to start a podcast. I guess we're doing a podcast now.
Okay, you're the one who clicked the button.
I know. I feel like I did it accidentally. Well, it's me and it's Keith.
Yep.
We're doing the That Chapter podcast. You know,
Yep.
Keith, how about you introduce this one? I'm sick of introducing the podcast.
Okay, I'm looking forward to doing this one. It's going to be great.
Okay, great. Just straight in, raw dogging it.
Are we going to jump straight in? It's a long one.
It is a long one. I suppose
Yeah.
we really should. Okay, do you have anything to, say to the audience before we begin? Yeah, we usually have our little chin wags about this and that. We talk about movies or we talk about scary incidents. No? Good?
No.
All right, okay, folks.
Let's jump
I hope you're
straight
ready.
in.
Exactly. No mucking about this one. Straight into it. Today, folks, we are talking about the case of Gordon Cummins. It's a very fascinating one for you. It's one of those stories that the more detail is brought up, you'll be thinking, how does everybody not know about this guy? I think I randomly sort of stumbled across this story, the case of Gordon Cummins, and then I researching more and reading more and more. You're like, wow, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's wild. This case, it's crazy.
Yeah, it's a crazy time in history as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's because with this story, it's not a case of where the crime or crimes happened, but with this one, it's when he was doing the killing, because it sort of got lost in like the whole sort of thing that happened.
I think it was coming off just the back of the Blitz, wasn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. He's called Gordon Cummins is also known as the Blackout Killer because he was a serial killer doing his serial killing in London during WW2, which is a pretty crazy time. I mean, I suppose there's a lot of people being killed, so
Yeah.
hey, what's just a few lost in the mix, you know?
That's one way of looking at it, I guess. Yeah.
In fairness, the people of London, they had bigger fish to fry. I mean, Nazis were bombing the shite, 7 shades of shite out of the city.
Yeah.
So, a little serial killing, don't mind if I do.
Yeah.
That's what he was doing, basically.
Yeah, so he just thought he could get away with it.
And he did for
He nearly did,
a
yeah.
little bit, yeah. The man we're about to analyze is one of the most singularly vicious killers I think we've probably ever talked about, and we've talked about some doozies. This one gets pretty graphic at points with the shit he did.
Yep.
So buckle up, buckaroos. And if he wasn't caught, he would have never stopped killing, and doing so as brutally as he could and did.
Yep.
So let's, Keith, what do you say we give it a go?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, great. So happy. All right, folks. So it all begins. The story of the Blackout Ripper and the Blackout murders begins on the morning of Monday, February 9th, 1942, when an electrician named Harold Batchelor entered a street-level air raid shelter in Montague Place, Marylebone, and stumbled across the body of a 41-year-old pharmacist named Evelyn Hamilton. Evelyn had clearly been involved in a violent altercation. Her scarf was wound around her head and her skirt had been lifted up with her underwear pulled down to her ankles. Her right breast had been exposed and had suffered several small cuts and bruises. She had also suffered a deep laceration above her right eye.
Yeah, a police officer later found Evelyn's handbag on nearby Wyndham Street, and several of the bag's contents had been scattered on the road outside the air raid shelter, leading the police to theorise that her killer had, rifled through it while fleeing the scene.
He said, "Tally-ho!"
Yeah.
running away with her handbag.
This is mine now, I'll take
Yeah.
this. So Evelyn, she'd only arrived in London from Hornchurch, a town east of London, the previous day, and had around £80 in her purse, which had been stolen by the killer. But she had been planning to pass through London on her way to Northern England to take a new job managing a pharmacy. So Evelyn, she had been made redundant from her previous role as a pharmacy manager due to the outbreak of the war, and was temporarily staying in a boarding house. Earlier on the Sunday before she was attacked, she had celebrated her birthday with a glass of white wine at a bar, and the air raid shelter was located between the bar and the boarding house where she was staying, leading investigators to believe that she was attacked while walking home. Later post-mortem indicated that her cause of death was manual strangulation. The pathologist also noted that her attacker was likely left-handed and that Evelyn had not been sexually assaulted.
2 days after the body of Evelyn Hamilton was found, just after 8:30 on the morning of February 10th, 2 meter readers, checking how much gas he used, they entered a flat in Soho, London, and discovered the naked and mutilated body of 34-year-old Evelyn Oatley laid out on the bed. Evelyn Oatley, like many women of the time, had been forced to turn to sex work to make ends meet when the war started, as her income from her job as a nightclub hostess just wasn't enough. She went by the name Nita Ward when meeting clients. She'd been badly beaten, and the scene around her was such a bloody mess that it was hard to tell what had killed her. To the left of her head, resting on the bed, was a Gillette safety razor, along with several additional blades on her nightstand and on the floor. Close to the bed were a pair of blood-covered curling tongs. Her handbag and its contents were strewn across the room. A pathologist's exam revealed Evelyn had no signs of defensive wounds to her hands or arms, which is probably the only merciful thing about her death. She was killed before she knew it, as what followed was on another level of savagery. Evelyn Oatley's body had been horrifically mutilated, with specific attention to her stomach, thighs, and genitals. The safety razor was most likely used for the majority of the violence. But the examiner speculated that several other wounds with a jagged edge were likely inflicted by a can opener, which...
Jesus. Horrific.
Yes, that's that for sure. Yeah. Finally, whoever had killed Evelyn Oatley had violated her with an electric torch, which they left in place. This is so gruesome.
Yeah.
Damn, this is dark. The killer had closed the apartment door behind them upon leaving, but it was unlocked, so the meter readers had been able to enter and then find Evelyn Oatley's body. So the task of finding Evelyn's killer, the second of the 2 Evelyns, it fell to Detective Chief Superintendent Frederick Sherrill. Sherrill and his team were able to recover several clean fingerprints from all over the scene, including on a variety of blood-stained items, such as a tin opener and on a piece of broken mirror, which had also been used to cut Evelyn's body after she was dead. Apart from noting that the killer was very likely left-handed, no fingerprint match was found. So the killer did not have a criminal record.
Oatley was last seen in public outside a restaurant talking to an unidentified man. 3 separate witnesses described him as wearing an airman's uniform with chestnut brown hair, a moustache and clean-shaven face. He appeared to be around 5'8" and was reportedly overheard telling Oatley that he liked blondes. So Oatley was later seen returning to her flat with the airman, and her neighbour was again able to clearly describe the mystery man. It sounds like a classic pilot,
Yeah.
Like the moustache, clean shaven. Yeah,
of course, airman with a moustache. Wow, he's a pilot. You're mandatory. You have to have a moustache if you're a pilot.
So close to midnight, the neighbour Poole was woken by a sudden loud increase in the volume of Evelyn's radio, but ignored it and went back to sleep. In hindsight, it's likely that her killer was using the radio to cover up the sounds of the attack.
Yeah. Thing is, though, middle of WW2, the suspect was an airman. Yes. Narrows it down in the middle of a global war, and he's dressed like somebody in the military. That was helpful. Then, February 13th, and you notice there's 2 days between attacks.
Yeah, they were pretty quick.
Yeah, the killer was pretty quick. 15-year-old Barbara Lowe had stopped by her mother's flat in Marylebone, only to meet with no answer and an unopened package left outside the door. See, Barbara visited her mother every 3rd weekend, so, the mother would know her daughter was going to be visiting, and it was unlikely she would have gone out. Eventually, teenage Barbara spoke to a neighbour who said that no one had seen her mother, Margaret, for a couple of days. Again, so Margaret Lowe expecting her daughter this weekend, and she's not there, and then hasn't been seen for a couple of days. Margaret Lowe had been widowed, and after moving to London from her home in Southend-on-Sea and struggling to get by on her house cleaner's wages, she had also been forced to engage in sex work using the alias Peggy Campbell to get by. Her neighbour had last seen Margaret in the early morning hours of Wednesday, February 11th, 2 days earlier, at around 1:15 a.m. Margaret was walking to her flat in the company of a client, who the neighbour heard leaving sometime later because he was whistling as he went. He had a great time.
Job well done, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. That was a good one. Walks out of there. But unfortunately, it wasn't a good one. Margaret Lowe's body was found on her bed, hidden beneath the duvet, which had been pulled up tightly to her chin, almost like she had been tucked in. Under the blanket, like Evelyn Oatley, she had clearly been badly beaten and violently attacked, and there was a lot of blood. Her legs had been spread apart and she was bent at the knee, like she'd been posed by the killer. A silk stocking was still wrapped around her neck, knotted in the middle, right beneath her jaw. You have 3 victims now, 2 of them murdered in their own home. Both of the ones who murdered in their home were violently, extremely it reminds me of Jack the Ripper.
Yes.
What he was doing. This case, means the Blackout Ripper. Man, English serial killer, London serial killers, I really love doing some sick shit.
Yeah.
Because the only person who was murdered, but not as graphically as the others, was the woman, the first Evelyn, killed in the air raid shelter. But that was obviously kind of out in the open.
Yeah,
so the killer wouldn't have had time to
do
what he wanted to do.
Maybe that was the plan, and somebody not barged in, but he got spooked.
Yeah.
Head off or something. Yeah.
Exactly. And you have these 3 murders all happening pretty much around the same time. The first attack was on the 8th of February.
Yeah.
Then the second attack was on the 9th of February.
Yeah.
And then you have the next attack on the 11th of February.
Yeah, it was a really quick, violent frenzy. And especially his MOs definitely seemed to be deposing the body for this shock value.
Yeah. It's really, it's truly quite disturbing. So Margaret's body was examined by famed forensic pathologist Sir Bernard Spilsbury.
Real quick about Sir Bernard Spilsbury. So he was a real-life Sherlock Holmes. He'd worked on several high-profile cases and set many of the forensic standards still used today. However, by some accounts, he was also known to be a bit of a dick. And his word was often taken as the absolute truth. So this influence meant that occasionally he made a couple of errors and may have sent the wrong people to the gallows.
Yeah, the thing is, actually, when I was researching into this, I was like, is he the inspiration for Sherlock Holmes? It's oh no, Sherlock Holmes was written 80 years earlier or whatever the hell those books are written. But yeah, he comes across as Sherlock Holmes house type figure where it's he's always right, He did set the standards for forensic pathologists, but then it's if anybody disagreed with him, you were ostracized basically from polite society.
Yes,
Later on, some people are kind of looking back and they're like, hey, he wasn't actually that great.
He made a couple of, I think we call them whoopsie daisies.
Yeah, exactly. Whoops.
So Spilsbury was particularly disturbed by the brutality inflicted upon Lowe, and he made sure to note the savagery of the killer. While some of the mutilation occurred while Margaret Lowe was still alive, the majority was inflicted post-mortem. So the cause of death was determined by strangulation with a ligature made from nylon stockings, which you mentioned. After the death, the killer took their time inflicting an extreme amount of violence on Lowe's body. So similar to Oatley, the killer focused on attacking their abdomen, their thighs and genital area, using a combination of a razor blade, a vegetable knife, a table knife, and a fire poker.
Damn.
So the killer caused such extensive damage that Lowe's stomach was left open, exposing her intestines and organs. It was So a wound nearly 10 inches long was found on the right side of her groin, and her uterus was also just hanging out.
Ugh.
Then, in a manner reminiscent to Oatley's case, the killer again inserted items into the victim's body. So a wax candle was placed 6 inches inside Lowe's vagina, and a bread knife was left protruding from her groin. So Spilsbury, he noticed that he was certain that the killer of Lowe and Oatley, they were the same person.
Oh my god.
That's not a far leap. These were pretty identical at the time.
Yeah, it's just incredibly nasty.
Yeah,
it's just so gross. The shit he did was very disturbing. It's very sickening. It reminds me of did you ever see that photo of Jack the Ripper's final victim?
Yeah.
That's what all I think of. Mary, yeah.
I'm just guessing because that seems like a name that's
probably
used
is Mary. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Classic Mary. But yeah, it's really gruesome where she's on the bed and she's just chopped up. That's what I kind of just was in my head when I was researching this. Because it sounds like they're even posed in the same way and you just eviscerated them. It's really, really gruesome.
Maybe he was taking inspiration.
Yeah, maybe. So once again, the killer's fingerprints were found on a whole heap of items around the room, and again indicated a left-handed person was responsible. Classic left-handy, if you ask me. That's why, never trust a left-handed person. That's what I say.
My daughter's left-handed.
I don't trust her. So, very Jack the Ripper so far. So, elsewhere in London on the same day, Margaret... No, okay. I'm going to quit while I'm ahead. On the same day, Margaret Lowe's body was found, which was February 13th, 1942. a young married woman named Margaret Haywood was walking home through Piccadilly when she met a young RAF airman who invited her to get a drink and something to eat. So as you can see, by the way, there's clearly only 2 names in London in the 40s. Everybody, all the women are named either Evelyn or Margaret.
Yeah, right.
Of the 4 women so far, 2 are Evelyns, 2 are... How? That's not even common names.
Right, yeah.
Like, well, I
it was
suppose
proper
nowadays,
then,
like,
yeah.
I guess back in the 1940s, they were clearly extremely common names. So after Margaret and this airman had eaten, they were walking through Piccadilly Circus, and then this man suddenly turned and forcefully shoved her into a doorway. Despite her protestations, the man attempted to grope Margaret and insisted that she go with him to a nearby air raid shelter where they could be alone. Interesting. In an effort to appease him, Margaret kissed him, but then told him she didn't want to go with him. Once again, the man tried to grope her, and Margaret fought back. This infuriated the man, who grew more violent and grabbed her by the throat and forced her back into the doorway, out of view of passers-by. The man then strangled her until she lost consciousness. Before she passed out, Margaret could distinctly hear the man repeating, you won't, over and over and over again. Fortunately for Margaret, as she lay prone and her assailant was rifling through her handbag, an 18-year-old delivery boy, delivery man was 18, I suppose, was passing by on his way to the pub and spotted her on the floor. When he approached, the man fled, leaving behind an RAF-issued gas mask and haversack. The young man helped Margaret to her feet, and once she was steady enough, he began walking her to the hospital, but they came across police officer James Skinner before they made it. Skinner asked them instead to go with him to West End Central Police Station to give the police an account of the offence and a description of the attacker while the memory was still fresh.
Once she'd completed her interview, the officer, he then escorted her off to the hospital, but the young passerby, he also provided his account, but more importantly, he handed over the gas mask and the haversack belonging to the man responsible. Both items bore a unique RAF regimental number, 525987, which could be traced back to the specific airman whom they were allocated. So Detective Sergeant Thomas Shepherd, he was tasked with finding out who the regimental number belonged to and contacted the Royal Air Force Police with a request for the name of the officer behind the regimental number I mentioned before. Not long after, DS Shepherd was contacted by an Air Force staff sergeant who informed him that the man he was looking for was a 28-year-old airman named Gordon Cummins.
Where have we heard that name before? Oh, at the intro. There you go. All right. Gordon Gordo. Good old Gordo.
Bad old Gordo.
Yeah, that's true. Gordon Frederick Cummins was born in New Earswick in North Yorkshire, up in the north of England, on February 18th, 1914. Gordon was the eldest of 4 children born to his civil servant father, John, who ran a school for delinquent youths, and full-time mother, Amelia. Gordon was far more fortunate than the youths who attended the school his father ran, being privileged enough to afford a private education. Despite his good fortune, he did little to take advantage of the opportunities afforded him by birth. Gordon was an average student at best and plain lazy and disinterested in his studies at worst. Rather than hitting the books, old Gordo chose to spend his time flirting with the ladies and gossiping with the lads. Pretty much every second of free time he had was spent socializing and generally dicking around with his chums. Regardless of his laziness and apparent lack of interest in anything academic, Gordon was far from an idiot. He simply chose to invest his energy elsewhere. When it came to leaving school at 16 in 1930, he did so with a diploma in chemistry. Gordon Cummins actually continued on the academic road and enrolled at the Northampton College of Technology, only to drop out 2 years later in November of 1932 when he was 18 years old. Gordon's short time as a student at the college strongly mirrored his secondary school time, again choosing to spend his valuable time knocking around with his mates over his studies. His life, completely, fairly unremarkable so far. Having dropped out of college and with zero direction in life, outside of a natural love of the finer things, 18-year-old Gordon moved from Northampton to Newcastle, where he managed to talk himself into a pretty decent job with good prospects as an industrial chemist. Had he knuckled down and worked hard, the job had the potential to be the making of him. Did he do so?
No. So, unfortunately for Gordon, that's just not the cloth from which he was cut. And his poor performance led to him being dismissed from the post less than 5 months. So he wasn't out of work for too long though. And the very same year, in August of 33, Gordon was again able to talk himself into a new role back in Northampton. So this time in a completely different field, training and working as a tanner. So these are the fellas that prep and treat animal hides to become leather and also work with the leather to make various items. As good as Gordon seemingly was at talking himself into these jobs, he was equally as shite as at keeping them. So, to be fair to the man, he did manage to at least stick this one out for a full year. Unfortunately, though, this didn't last long, and he was fired less than a month after his first anniversary for consistently being late and sometimes just, just not showing up at all.
Just did not give a shit.
No, he didn't care.
Sounds familiar. So with work up north becoming scarce, Gordon Cummins spent a few months bouncing from job to job, mostly working in menial labor type stuff. Gordon quickly got frustrated to the point he decided a drastic change was in order, so he packed up all his possessions and headed off down south to seek out more lucrative opportunities, preferably ones that didn't mind him turning up when he felt like it. In October of 1934, Gordon actually managed to land himself a fairly decent job as a leather dresser with a clothing factory. Landing such a relatively well-paid job so quickly after arriving in London, it's definitely testament to Gordon's ability to sell himself. He was a real good shite talker, that's for sure. Whether he stuck to the truth or not didn't really matter too much. He just gifted the gab.
Some people are just really good at interviews.
Yeah, he definitely was. Good at nothing else. More importantly, though, he even managed to stick the job out for a few months, and his £12 a month salary, was more than enough to give Gordon a sample of the high life he'd long admired and witnessed from the fringes as a youngster. By the way, that's £3 a week, which is the equivalent of roughly £120 a week today, which again is like £120 a week. That sounds like that'd be shit pay now.
Yeah.
But a house back in like 1930s was less than £2,000,
right,
which would be less than, so a house back in the 40s, today's money, it would be less than £40,000.
Wow, okay.
So, you know what I mean? So it's like earning £120.
So the salary wasn't like wildly different, but the cost of housing was definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's not, it would be shit money, but not like terrible.
Yeah.
No, I mean, no, it still would be terrible. £120 a week working full time.
Well, it's not great,
Yeah.
Well, but
again, like for 40,
and the economies is so bad.
I know, yeah. But I mean, 40. I'd take that shit pay if houses were that, much cheaper. Yeah. Like the pay is not 10 times more, but houses are 10 times more. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Anyways, weird. So Gordon got on well at the firm and was quickly offered the chance to train as a foreman, which is a coveted position that paid very, very well. Being a foreman would have essentially set Gordon up for a life with the company and allowed him the chance to have a family and a comfortable life. As always though, Gordon would find a way to throw away any good grace he'd acquired and quickly found himself slipping down the ladder. See, Gordon simply couldn't resist the pull of the finer things in life. Now that he was earning a good wage, he began to frequent some of London's more exclusive clubs and establishments, my good man. For obvious reasons, Gordon could only afford to visit, these places every so often. But unfortunately, Gordon realized, that, well, he could only visit every so often, but a lot of other people could visit as often as they pleased. People who could afford to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner, each at a different club every day of the week. Men who could smoke expensive cigars, order vintage wines without asking the price. He also caught on to the fact that the more money these aristo types seemed to have, the less they would actually appear to pay for.
They're making £4 a week.
yeah, exactly. Damn, these fuckers. So with his money stretched thin, Gordon, jealous of all these rich folk he began to, rub elbows with, he began to tell people he met at various West End bars and clubs that he was actually the illegitimate son of an insultingly wealthy English lord who gave Gordon a monthly allowance to keep him happy. My good man. Wow, he sounds awful.
Right, I know,
yeah.
Although, I don't know, at this point, this is like obviously pre-killing. I don't know, he seems like a bit of crack about it.
Everybody hated him. Well, we'll get into it, but I mean, he was like charming, but also like he's like a charming dickhead.
Yeah.
He could talk himself into your pants, but you'd kick him out of bed. Is one way of putting it. That's a weird way. I don't know why I put it that way, but I did anyway. Gordon even began to insist that staff at these places refer to him as the Honourable George Cummins, my dear boy. Man, well, I mean, if you're telling people, call me the Honourable Gordon Cummins, I'll just say you're Honourable Gordon shithead. I don't know. So while the ruse was enough to convince people Gordon came from money, there was, of course, one key ingredient to the stew of deceit missing: money. In order to pay for the lifestyle he never could have afforded, even on his more than ample wages, Gordon used a mixture of his trusted position at the factory, his God-given charms, and just plain old outright theft. Gordon's extravagant spending and apparently lavish lifestyle did not go unnoticed by his employers. They're paying him and they're like, we're not paying you this much.
Yeah. How are you doing this? Like, the thing was, Gordon, he wasn't a subtle fella, and he would constantly brag to his co-workers and really anyone who gave him the time of day about his various successes with women and the lurid adventures they led on to. And
Nobody liked hearing this. It's like, I mean, if you're the type of person who needs to brag about that shit, you're just like, boy.
Yeah. Guys, I'm sure it gets a bit tedious after a while.
Yeah.
So the stories, they were all complete fantasy, but that was pretty much Gordon all around. By February of 1935, Gordon's bosses, they'd grown tired of his poor performance, along with his apparent disinterest in his work, and he was let go from the employment at the factory. So that left him with little choice but to rely on the kindness of family. And lucky for Gordon, his brother had also made the move down south and was living in a flat in London. So Gordon knew he needed to find employment, and quickly, especially if he wanted to return to the lifestyle that he'd quickly become so accustomed to.
Yeah, he needed those dollar bills, baby.
Mm-hmm.
Needed a £3 a week salary.
Yeah.
So over the next couple of years, from the outside at least, Gordon's life seemed to take a pretty big left turn, and a positive one at that. Soon after losing his job at the factory, Gordon decided that he'd give the armed forces a go and volunteered himself to join the Royal Air Force. After completing the necessary tests and assessments, Gordon Cummins was accepted into the RAF. Now, he wasn't made a pilot or anything like that. He was basically the guy who would do the safety checks on the aircraft and Spitfires and whatever before the planes, actually took off.
He was just one step away.
Yeah.
We're like 2 steps away.
Yeah, true. As he often did, Gordon quickly endeared himself to his superiors and became known as ambitious and intelligent, but also a bit odd and more than a little bit full of himself. It just seems like Gordon was really, really good at kissing ass. Like a real dick rider, ass kisser, brown nose.
Yeah.
And that's charming.
He had that initial charm. He was able to sell himself, big himself up at the very start. But then, as you kind of got to know him, he started going, "Oh, Lord Cummins."
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That said, that boastful attitude, along with his transparent lies about being related, some anonymous English noble, it all basically quickly made him unpopular with his peers, and earned him the very ironically intended nickname of the Duke. Basically, everyone thought he was technically capable, but a complete dickhead. One person Gordon did manage to woo, though, was a young woman named Marjorie Stevens. Marjorie was the secretary to a West End theatre producer, a decent job in itself, and the two caught each other's attention at an air show. The couple courted one another for the next 7 months before getting married, with only 3 days left in 1936.
Yeah, during the next few years, Gordon's life, along with the rest of the world, changed drastically.
What happened, Keith?
A little thing, I don't know if you've heard of it.
Oh, man.
But very soon after the September 3rd, 1939, with the outbreak of World War II, Gordon, he was transferred for a short time to a new post on the Scottish coast. So with the war in full swing, Gordon was regularly rubbing shoulders with the RAF pilots, and he was seeing the attention that these daring men were getting, and he thought to himself, no, I'd like to get a piece of that action. I want some of that. So Gordon, he began working towards becoming a fighter pilot himself.
So later, in November of 1941, he was sent over to Cornwall. Unfortunately, the social scene in Cornwall proved to be a distraction for Gordon, and his old habits soon resurfaced. He joined a social club, the Blue Peter Club, and earned himself another ironic nickname, this time with a little demotion to the Count. Though he initially endeared himself to the owner and manager of the club, he quickly fell out of favour when she discovered that during stints volunteering as an ad hoc barman, Gordon had been serving his RAF mates drinks but not charging them. Soon after he'd been asked not to continue lending his sticky little helping hand, the manager of the club also found that £35 worth of jewellery was missing from her room. Basically, everyone from the victim to the local police knew it was Gordon who'd nicked the gear, but there was no evidence to make it worthwhile chasing him down. By January 1942, Gordon had built up enough flight experience, with more than 1,000 hours of airtime, that he was able to take the exam to finally complete training and become an aviator. For once, Gordon actually applied himself and aced the flight exam, which led him to being transferred once again, along with 300 other flight recruits, to London. Gordon was due to report for duty for the first time as an aviator at 10 a.m. on the 2nd of February 1942. Everything was coming up Millhouse. It's interesting that his spree into serial killing happened right before he was due to probably have combat.
Right,
to combat.
yeah.
This would have been him actually...
I'm sure they were very transferable skills.
Yeah, that's true. But it's like, he was, about to probably start, going to shoot down the Nazis, planes or whatever, Messerschmitts and Spitfires, all that kind of stuff. And he's like, oh, I'll just start killing people. I mean, you're actually going to go kill people anyway.
Right,
so if you're a serial killer...
Yeah.
It's like, it doesn't even make sense.
Yeah.
Like, you're actually going to kill people, and you're legally allowed to kill these people. It's war.
Yeah, I know, right? I suppose it just goes to how much of a coward he was.
Yeah,
He's
there
like,
you go.
I could go off and face someone equally as...
Yeah.
or I'll stay here and kill women.
Wow, what a bitch
That
he is.
sounds easier. Yeah.
2 weeks after Gordon Cummins reported to the recruiting center in the morning of February 14th, he found himself in handcuffs, waiting to be interviewed on suspicion of the assault of Margaret Haywood in Piccadilly. Cummins' own account of the evening with Margaret when she was assaulted differed wildly. Margaret was the final one, remember, as she walked through Piccadilly and was dragged into the doorway. Mm-hmm. So Gordon Cummins said he didn't attack her. This was in spite of him having visibly bruised knuckles and several small cuts to his hands. Asked to account for the wounds, Gordon Cummins said that he had received the injuries in his work duties. According to him, he had spent the evening in question drinking whiskey at a pub on Baker Street with an Air Force corporal he'd only met at the bar and whose name he conveniently couldn't remember. Sometime that evening, himself and the unnamed corporal shared a taxi cab to another bar where he and the corporal shared several more drinks, all of which were strong spirits. Once himself and the corporal became separated, Gordon got talking to a woman at the bar who he admitted could have been Margaret Haywood. Gordon, though, insisted he was so drunk by this point in the evening he couldn't recall, he couldn't recall what happened and only had a very vague and hazy recollection of walking alongside the woman he'd met at the bar. When Detective Sergeant Shepard challenged Gordon's version, Gordon continued to aggressively assert his innocence, only then to admit despite not remembering anything and being sure he would never attack anybody, he was, however, willing to apologize and pay substantial compensation to Margaret Haywood. The old, I didn't do it, but here's money and an apology for trying to kill you, just in case I did it. It's like, wow, okay.
I'm so drunk, who knows?
Yeah, who knows, but here, take all my money.
So Cummins, he was asked to give his account again in writing, which he did, and then he was immediately arrested on suspicion of causing grievous bodily harm. He was held on remand while the police, higher-ups, they considered a charge against Cummins.
The day before the failed attempt on Margaret Haywood's life, on a chilly Thursday night, February 12th, a 25-year-old sex worker named Catherine Mulcahy, who went by the alias Kathleen King, was solicited for her services by an airman in uniform and agreed to a rendezvous at her flat. The flat wasn't far away, but the airman waved down a taxi for them anyway, and even paid Mulcahy an advance of 2 £1 notes. Mulcahy was happy to get a taxi, as it had snowed and it was a particularly cold evening. But once the two arrived at her flat, and Mulcahy had lit a fire, she stripped down to just her boots, followed by the airman doing the same. However, she became suspicious of the airman's intentions while she undressed as he sat on the bed watching her with what she later described as a strange smile on his face.
Where's your knives? Why? Oh, it doesn't matter.
Just good to know. As soon as they were in position to do the deed, the man suddenly became extremely aggressive and forced his knees into Mulcahy's stomach and began to try and strangle her. Mulcahy, though, was stronger than he expected and was able to fight the man off her and gave him a stiff kick in the stomach, which was enough to stagger the man, giving the young woman enough time to book it out the door and make loud of enough fuss to get her neighbour's attention in the flat next door to her own.
Yeah, Mulcahy, she continued to scream and draw as much attention as she could. Even as the man, he hastily thrown his uniform back on and he approached her outside and he took 8 £1 notes from his trouser pocket and was just like throwing cash at her, apologising and telling her that, I'm sorry. And he simply I just had too much to drink. And then the airman, he fled, half naked, but he also accidentally left his belt of his RAF uniform behind.
And then later, that very same evening, February 12th, a 32-year-old sex worker named Doris Juanette, who went by Olga, was last seen by her friend at around 10:20 as the two of them shared a whiskey at a local corner house tea rooms. Doris told her friend that she was going to go and see a regular client who she jokingly called the captain. Damn, he went from the Duke, the Count, to the captain. Severe emotions. The next evening, February 13th, Doris's husband, Henry, came home to find himself locked out of their apartment. Henry knew his wife was expecting him home, and the door should have been left open for him, so he immediately realized something was wrong and tried to force his way inside, but couldn't get through the door. The elderly Henry was considerably older than his wife Doris, having met her as a client, and becoming her husband in November of 1935. Once the two married, Doris pulled back from sex work and only resorted to taking on clients if she needed to earn a little extra cash. She largely survived off an allowance paid to her by her husband, who had a good job as a manager of a hotel, a job which required him to stay overnight at the hotel, which in turn gave Doris the chance to take in clients. I wonder if he knew that she was taking in clients while he was working overnight at the hotel.
I'd say so. I mean, like,
Damn,
people were
dude.
struggling for money.
Yeah, I mean, it is in the middle of a war, but damn.
Yeah, do what you need to do.
I
don't want to hear about it.
That is, yeah. So Henry, anyway, he resorted to calling the police for help, who dispatched a constable to assist. The constable told Henry to wait for him in the hallway while he pried the door open and went inside to investigate. The apartment pitch black, and the constable had to fumble around a little bit to find the light switch. As soon as he flicked it on, his eyes were immediately set on the bloody, naked and brutalized body of Doris Juanette. The constable backed out of the room right away and told Henry, "I must advise you to not go in that room," advice Henry definitely should have heeded. This was long before the days of mobile phones and even officers, having two-way radios, so the constable had to walk back to the police station, where he asked the desk sergeant to contact CID, which is the Criminal Investigation Department. Officers from Scotland Yard, who were responsible for homicide investigations, they arrived soon after. The scene around Doris Juanette was maybe the worst yet. Scotland Yard CID detective Leonard Clare was dispatched to the scene and arrived just after 8 p.m. that evening. From a cursory glance of the scene, he could see that Doris was naked except for a black nightgown, and she still had a ligature made from her own nylon stockings, and it was knotted tightly under her chin, still in place, wrapped around her neck. Her body looked posed, with her left hand placed between her legs in a suggestive manner. Like that of Evelyn Oatley and Margaret Lowe's, Doris's abdomen, thighs, and genitals had been severely mutilated. Her left breast had almost been entirely carved away. A more intense examination revealed that Doris's body had two deep gashes, 6 inches and 6.5 inches in length, respectively, one between her navel and genitals, and the other to her vagina. The knife used to inflict the extensive damage had been placed almost delicately on her thigh. Unlike the others, there were signs of sexual activity, with 2 used condoms lying on the floor next to the body. A further search of the scene with information from Henry revealed that a gold watch worth around £5 was missing and presumed stolen from the flat. Yeah, you can definitely imagine the police officer telling Henry, "Yeah, don't go in there."
Yeah, you don't see what's in there.
Yeah, that is
heavy. So the post-mortem examination was once again conducted by Sir Bernard Spilsbury. Spilsbury, he concluded that Doris had been strangled before the most horrific knife wounds were inflicted. However, he noted that she may still have been alive, though on the verge of death, when the wounds to her left breast and thigh were inflicted. The killer had then likely realised that she was still alive and finished her off before returning to cutting. Spilsbury, he speculated from the way that the cuts, they started more neatly to the way that they progressively became more jagged and less controlled, that the killer had worked themselves up into this violent frenzy as they went, the wounds to her vagina and thigh being the last and most vicious of all.
Yeah. So, with the killings of Evelyn Oatley, Margaret Lowe, and Doris Juanette happening in quick succession, each, in a similar ultra-violent fashion and taking place during London's blackout hours, the police attributed the crimes to a single perpetrator, and the press quickly dubbed the killer the Blackout Ripper. Though the murders did become a national story and featured in headlines around the country, the fact that they took place in the middle of World War II meant they received far less attention than, had they taken place basically at any other time in history. The blackout periods, by the way, were just a fact of life in British cities during World War II. Blackout is essentially what it sounds like. Outdoor lights were minimized so that enemy bombers would have a hard time making out cities and landmarks. Windows were covered, street lamps left unlit. Anything that would catch the eye of a low-flying bomber was dissuaded. That meant that even having a cheeky smoke was a no-no, just in case the embers from your cigarette were spotted. That's crazy.
Is that true? That's crazy. That's
yeah,
bad.
that's wild, no? I'm probably like maybe the match lighting up.
Right, yeah,
But still, those German
just
fucking
anything at all,
bomber pilots. 20/20 vision, these fuckers.
Right.
Goddamn. Unfortunately, an unwanted side effect of the blackouts meant that the only people out on the streets probably weren't up to anything good and made street walking, well, very risky for the average citizen. Unsavory types around, and it's like pitch black. You can't see anything.
Yeah, especially in London with all the alleyways and stuff.
Yeah,
dragged in
scary.
anywhere.
Yeah, man. There must have been a lot of crimes during this time.
So throughout the early investigation, Cummins, he still insisted that he was innocent and even suggested that another airman could have switched his haversack and gas mask and intentionally left him at the scene to implicate him. Catherine Mulcahy was later brought in alongside Margaret Haywood, the two survivors, and both were asked if they would be willing to identify their attacker from a lineup. While Haywood, without hesitation, pointed to Cummins, Mulcahy was unable to identify her attacker. So despite Mulcahy not being able to ID Cummins, detectives, they still strongly believed Cummins was responsible for both attacks. The pound notes that had been thrown at Catherine Mulcahy as the killer fled, they were tracked by serial number as being issued to Gordon Cummins. That's some good police work.
It is. Yeah. It's pretty crazy. And this, of course, was just the very tippity top of the iceberg of Gordon Cummins' crimes, and only a snowflake on the mountain of evidence against him. And that was, just the two women who survived the attacks. They were still... What about the attacks he hadn't been linked to yet, which were extremely violent? So while he was being held in custody for the failed assault of Margaret Haywood in Piccadilly, detectives knew he was also very likely the man they were looking for, known as the Ripper. The pile of evidence started with a look at Gordon Cummins' billet passbook. So each billet, or barracks, basically it had a logbook that airmen were required to sign every time they came and went. The book Gordon Cummins was supposed to have signed showed that he apparently returned to the billet before 10:30 p.m. on the nights in question, the nights of the murders, with many other entries from earlier in February missing completely. The times and signatures related to the nights of the Ripper's known murders had all been written in good old pencil. Wow, technology back in the 40s. So they very likely had been changed. I love that. It's so simple. By the way, it's funny researching through this. It's like before forensics and computers, digital shit, all that sort of stuff. Getting away with murder was so much easier.
Right?
You know, you could basically, there's probably so many insane serial killers we will just never know.
Right, and like it's just as simple as like, I'm gonna write it in pencil and rub it out later.
Exactly.
And I got away with it.
You did, like almost did, yeah. During the questioning of the other airmen in the same billet as Gordon Cummins, those interviewed readily admitted that they would often sign in and out for one another and would cover for each other when someone broke curfew, which was a frequent occurrence. A DCI on the case, that's a Detective Constable Inspector, I think, Edward Greeno, found that Gordon Cummins and another airman named Felix Sampson had used a fire escape to leave the billet after curfew on the nights of the murders, and neither had returned till the early hours. So he happens to be out and about.
Up to no good, I suspect.
What came next really did Gordon Cummins in, though. The suspicion and evidence against him was more than enough to merit a search of Gordon Cummins' personal possessions. This turned up several items that had been identified as belonging to various victims of the Ripper, and had all earlier been reported as missing from each of the crime scenes. These included a white cigarette case inscribed with the initials LW that had belonged to Evelyn Oatley and was found alongside a photograph of Oatley's own mother that was hidden in a kitchenette area frequently used by Cummins. Elsewhere was a fountain pen inscribed with Doris Junet's initials. A gold wristwatch was also found, which lined up with the one missing that Henry said was missing from him and Doris's flat. A variety of other items were also found, which were thought to have been taken from the victims, but were not able to be 100% verified.
Upon closer examination of Cummins' gear, traces of blood were discovered on a shirt and a belt in his kit bag, for which he could offer no explanation for. In an early piece of advanced forensics work by the police, brick dust was found on the turned-up cuffs of Cummins' uniform trousers, so the same distinctive type of dust found on Evelyn Hamilton's body at the bomb shelter where she was discovered. So this dust originated from the shelter's chipped mortar. Larger pieces of the same debris were also found in Cummins' abandoned haversack. Additionally, Cummins' fingerprints matched those left by Evelyn Oatley's killer, as well as the prints collected from 2 more of the Ripper's crime scenes.
It's all coming up, Gordo. So with the evidence mounted against him, charges against Gordon Cummins were pretty much inevitable. He was charged with the murders of Evelyn Oatley, Margaret Lowe, and Doris Chouinette. 3 days later, on February 20th, he was additionally charged with the attempted murders of Catherine Mulcahy and Margaret Haywood. In March, Gordon Cummins was given an additional charge for the murder of Evelyn Hamilton. That brought the total to 4 murders and 2 attempted murders. Gordon entered a plea of not guilty, which wasn't a surprise as he continued to insist he was innocent the entire time. And throughout the entire trial, Gordon presented himself as wholly disinterested with proceedings and was reported to be happily chatting with his lawyers and appeared not to pay attention, despite his life being on the line. He was just too cool for school.
He just couldn't focus on anything.
Yeah.
Like work and his trial.
yeah. Unfortunately, the only thing he could focus on was murder. The prosecution threw everything they had at Cummins, to which he had little real defense. He was forced to testify in his own defense, an act that any good lawyer will tell you is pretty much a last gasp type deal. And to make it worse, rather than double down, Gordon began to alter his story about the night Evelyn Oatley died right there in the dock. He admitted to being with her and admitted to lying in his original statement. Then, having taken less than half an hour to consider their verdict, the jury foreman, keeping eye contact with Cummins, replied, "Guilty of murder."
That was personal.
Yeah, he's like, "Fuck you, buddy." I mean, they probably hated him. It's everybody.
Yeah.
Cummins made no sign he'd heard a thing and simply stared at the jury. His wife, who was in the public gallery, found it a little more distressing and she burst into tears.
God, I forgot he had a wife.
Yeah, Marjorie. Yeah, and by the way, she and his family stuck by him the entire time.
Wow, okay.
Believing his innocence until the very end. When asked by Justice Asquith, was there a reason, if any, that he should not have him hanged, Gordon Cummins stated simply, "I am completely innocent, sir."
Okay.
Great. yeah.
Sure.
The judge was obviously entirely unswayed by Cummins' lack of fucks and returned in kind by rendering a sentence of death by hanging. Cummins was taken back into custody and soon after moved to a cell on the condemned wing at Her Majesty's Prison, Wandsworth. Cummins did try a very half-hearted appeal, but this was swiftly and roundly rejected. And so it was June 25th, 1942. During an actual air raid, by the way, Cummins was taken to the noose and given a brandy to calm his nerves as he calmly walked to the top of the scaffolds. And, I was when I was reading about this, I was like, man, I can only imagine it must be pretty terrifying to walk to the scaffold.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're given you're given alcohol to calm you down.
Right, yeah.
But then I just remember what he did to the women, and I'm like, actually, no, fuck this guy.
Yeah.
Cummins is the only known criminal in history to have been executed during an active air raid. So there you go. And he remains buried within the walls of Wandsworth Prison.
God, that would be so weird. Like, you're executing someone, you're hanging them, and you're also kind of like, fuck, we might die.
Yeah, exactly. Fuck, I might actually die during it.
We all might die right now.
Take cover. Yeah.
God, that was really quick, though, because, wasn't the first one, February 1942? And then he was hung in June 1942.
Yep.
God,
that's exactly
so
it.
much chaos in such a short time.
Well, I guess during the war, you don't muck around. Yeah.
That's true. So after his death, Cummins, he was linked to 2 additional murders that took place around October 1941 while he was posted in Killearn, England, before his move to London. So although stationed in Killearn, Cummins was known to travel regularly to London during this period. The first victim was a 19-year-old clerk named Maple Churchyard, who was known to associate with locally stationed servicemen. Her naked body was discovered by workmen clearing a bombed-out house on October 14th. So Churchyard's handbag appeared to have been rifled through, with its contents scattered around the room. A pathologist determined that she had been murdered the day before, strangled by her own underwear, and concluded that the killer was likely left-handed.
There you go, lefties at it again.
That's it. So the similarities to Cummins' known crimes make him a very strong suspect in her death. The second case involved Edith Eleonora Humphreys, a 48-year-old widow. She was found in her Regent's Park home, lying on her bed with her apartment door left ajar, which attracted the attention of passers-by. Post-mortem indicated that her killer had initially attempted to strangle her, but failing that, he resorted to slashing her throat. The attacker then stabbed her in the head so forcefully that the blade penetrated her skull and entered her brain. Shockingly, Humphreys was still alive when they first discovered, but she died shortly after arriving at the hospital. Several valuable pieces of jewelry were missing from her apartment. So yeah, I don't know, that sounds like it was kind of maybe in the first.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like we said, I mean, it's so easy to get away with all sorts of crimes back in the day. Who knows how many other victims? Especially because he was a serviceman, so he's moved around. He moved around a lot, and then he was based in the military, which then moved him around a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's lots of other attacks, attempted murders, and stuff that he got up to. But you know, it was just during the war, so it's keep calm and carry on, as they said in England at the time.
What a time to unalive.
Yeah.
That
Very
should be
well
the tagline
said.
for a movie.
Yeah, that should be the tagline. Well, it's a crazy movie. Maybe there is a movie. It's this. That's what I'm saying. It's like this story is insane, but it just got buried by the whole, you know,
the other thing that was going on.
Yeah, that other whole business that was going on, nasty business. But there you go. That is the story of the Blackout Ripper, Gordon Cummins. What a shithead.
Yep, big time. He deserved the hanging.
He did. He did indeed. Yeah. That's it. So there you go. I mean, I don't really have much to say other than that.
Yeah, good story. Really good story.
It
and
is a
one
good
I've
story.
never heard of before. So
I know. It's quite fascinating. But we will leave it there, folks. This was a long one, so I think we'll leave this one there. But you know what? Let's get back into it soon. With another episode of the thatchapter podcast.
Let's do it.
All right. Thank you, folks, so much for listening. It means a lot to Keith. I know it does. He's got tears in his eyes as I say that.
That's unrelated.
It means a lot to me. New episodes of the That Chapter podcast out every Monday. So please give it a go wherever you get your good podcasts. Which we like to think this one is. Yeah, appreciate it. All right. Thanks, folks.
I'll see you.
Bye. And had jeez, I can't. Jeez, is gonna be so mad.